Hello, this is House Toast, and this is the story of the most incredible journey that you've probably never heard of. So strap in, folks, fasten your seatbelts, get ready, grab a drink, make yourself comfortable, strap in, lay back, and let's go. The year is 1904. Russia just built a railroad to Port Arthur, and upon completion upgraded their armies from a shit ton to a fuck ton. What? How? Why? What? Who? And that's a great question. All a couple moments prior to that, Japan wanted to enter the club of global conquering superpowers. They just hadn't conquered anything yet. They took a quick glance at a map and thought, let's conquer Korea. Of course, conquering Korea wouldn't be as easy as just, going over there and taking it, as there were many political, cultural, and human rights issues too, and so they conquered Korea. Feeling confident in themselves after a lunch full of conquest, they thought about biting a big chunk out of Manchuria for dinner. That's this thing. You know who also just had lunch in Manchuria? It's these guys. They themselves were level 6 Laser Lotus member of the Global Conquering Superpower Club and just built a railroad all across their conquered superpower land and connected it right next door to Korea in Port Arthur. Of course, that's when Japan and Russia came to an agreement to stop conquering any further into Manchuria. They married, had 7 wonderful children, and settled down in a suburban neighborhood somewhere outside Toronto. Except they didn't, and on the 8th of February 1904, Japan declared war on Russia. They were so eager to be at war with Russia that they attacked Port Arthur 3 hours before even declaring war. Wow, the determination. You don't see that anymore. Their attack was so surprising, they managed to take out Russia's entire Eastern Fleet in 2 days. That a country like Japan could take on a global conquering superpower just like that was unheard of. To put that in a modern perspective, imagine in 2021 somebody taking out France's entire fleet station at Bordeaux. And then imagine that someone was the Undertaker. It wouldn't be impossible, but you probably would be surprised to read it in the news. The Russian Tsar Nicholas II was not happy about that, and in a moment of 1904 he ordered the next closest fleet to crush the Japanese Navy. Unfortunately, they were stationed here in the Baltic Sea, 6,500 kilometers away. Except ships kinda need to go by sea, so it was more like 22,505.4 kilometers. Which, it has to be said, was only his second most ambitious plan after trying to ban vodka. And never mind that it would take ages to get there, there were a couple of other problems with that journey. Where shall we begin? First problem, the Russian Navy. Although the Russian Empire was pretty damn big, they were not known for their naval prowess, as half of their navy was effectively in a bathtub controlled by the Ottomans, and the other half in ports that are frozen solid as soon as winter looks at them funny. You have to understand, for Russia the navy was less like a branch of the military and more of an on-off hobby that you end up giving up anyways, like learning French, unicycling, or raising children. That meant that their ships were neither well designed nor tested in combat. Most of them were basically just older repurposed ships that had the latest advances in naval warfare technologies added to them with a bit of duct tape. One guy gave them his old yacht, and they were like, perfect. Are you sure this is up to the standards of the military? With all due respect, sir, you wouldn't understand the intricacies of war if they shot in your backyard. It doesn't have weapons. Dimitri, get the gun. Most of their ships were severely overweight. Some of them were so overweight they couldn't fire half the weapons, others were so overweight their armor effectively offered no protection against enemy shells, and one was so overweight it outright sank in the harbor. At least they had experienced and well-trained personnel to make up for it, is what they would have said if they had experienced and well-trained personnel to make up for it. But they didn't, and their crews were made up mostly of peasants, many of which couldn't read or know how to sail, or say of themselves that they've ever been on a boat, or that they've ever seen an open body of water in their life. But hey, some of them made up for it with basic knowledge in Microsoft Excel. Thinking of it, it's actually quite genius if you recruit people that probably can't swim. They're like, no way we're going under. And I mean, so what? They didn't have the best equipment or people to handle that equipment. It was still better than the US Navy, where it seems like most of the ranks are made up of criminals and murderers. Second problem, logistics. The fleet was supposed to go from here to here. A fun fact, ships need fuel, literal boatloads of fuel. Turns out, It couldn't quite make the trip on one tank. Their range was more like this, maybe this much if they turned off the engine at each traffic light, but even then, it was still not quite enough. And so, out of the kindness of their hearts, and not because they wanted to stick it to Japan, Germany offered to send ships loaded with coal to refuel the Russian fleet on the go. How very kind of them. Let's give it up for Germany. Well done. And so the journey began. Captain Rojestvenski, lovingly known as Mad Dog, was the unfortunate soul in charge of the expedition. 45 ships in the now renamed 2nd Pacific Squadron start their voyage in October 1904 from modern-day Latvia. For anyone still wondering what kind of tone this journey would take on, the 2nd Pacific Squad would soon give reassurance. Shortly after they started, one flagship ran aground, one cruiser lost its anchor chain, and in the midst of trying to recover from that, one destroyer accidentally rammed into one of their biggest battleships, which had to return home. Eventually they got going. However, a bit of hysteria set in when the fleet was approaching Denmark. Since the crews were mostly peasants that have never been in a warlike situation, they were more paranoid than your brain when you go through airport security. What if we accidentally have a gun? Subsequently, when they saw 2 ships in the distance headed in their general direction, instead of waiting to identify them, the whole fleet opened fire. The 2 men at the helm of these fisher boats were quite surprised, and since 44 ships were firing at them, surprisingly unharmed. Turns out they were just delivering a personal message from the Tsar himself to Captain Mad Dog, informing him of all things that he had been promoted. An honest mistake though, and luckily they would learn from it, and it would never happen again. A couple of days later, a fleet of British fisher boats was just hanging out and fishing, minding their own business, as the 2nd Pacific Squad arrived on the scene. Long story short, the whole fleet opened fire, and chaos ensued on the deck of the Russian ships. Several of them were signaling that they themselves were hit by torpedoes. I don't know. Some of the crew put on their life vests and went into fetal formation on the floor, others going as far as unsheathing their swords, yelling that the Japanese had boarded their ships. A rather unlikely observation, seeing as they were battling unarmed British fishermen on the other side of the planet. When the smoke cleared, after a long night of battling, it was apparent to everyone that mistakes were made again. On the negative side, out of the dozen English fisher boats, they had damaged 4, sank 1, and 2 of their own cruisers had been under fire by no less than 7 of their own battleships. But on the positive side, their aim was so terrible that an absolute disaster was averted. One of their ships had fired upwards of 500 times without hitting a single thing. As you might imagine, the British were not happy about that. Did you just or the British equivalent of that?
I beg your pardon.
Rojestvenski was ordered to dock in Spain and leave behind the officers who were responsible for the absolute mess they had produced the night before. He used this as an opportunity to rid himself of Captain Macleod, one of his biggest critics, and, understandably so, as the last thing this fleet needed was someone criticizing their actions. Through some 4D underwater diplomatic jiu-jitsu, war with Britain was avoided. As a punishment, however, the Pacific Squad was not allowed through the Suez Canal, elongating their journey by a mere 8,000 kilometers and a couple of months. At this rate, they would have to hope that the Japanese they were supposed to fight would eat healthy and exercise regularly, because otherwise there was a chance that they might just die of old age before the fleet even arrived. A couple of days later, somebody probably, or hopefully, asked, has anybody seen the repair ship, Kamchatka? Nope, said everybody, and that was that. The Africa chapter. Things can only get better from here was probably a sentence that was punishable by death at that point. As they left Tangier Harbor in Morocco, one ship's anchor ripped out the underwater telegraph cables of the city, cutting off their communication to Europe for the better part of 4 days. At last, some positive news, however, as the AWOL ship Kamchatka managed to find their way back to the fleet. They reported that while they were lost, they were in an engagement with 3 Japanese ships. 300 shells were fired, but they didn't manage to hit any of them, which probably was for the better, as those Japanese ships later turned out to be a French sailing ship, a German fisher boat, and a Swedish merchant. And then things got worse. In order to save time with the constant refueling, they decided to take on double loads of coal when they met up with the floating German gas station. A stroke of genius. Why didn't they think of that earlier? Oh yeah, wait. Now coal had to be stored just about everywhere on the ships, and people were dying from the poisonous air. That's why. Although I probably could have said this after every other sentence that came before, morale was now at an all-time low. In order to lift the spirits, somebody had the great idea to let the crewmen collect exotic African animals as pets to roam around the ships. Let me reiterate that somebody thought it was a great idea to let the crewmen collect exotic African animals as pets to roam around the ships. This went as well as you might imagine, as on top of everything, the decks of the ships were now full of exotic African fauna, including crocodiles and poisonous snakes, the latter of which wrapped themselves around some of the guns and later bit one of the commanding officers. I don't know what happened to him, but seeing how things were going, he probably died. And it got worse. Their refrigerated supply ship broke down, which not only meant that most of their food was spoiled, but also since they dumped everything in the water, they were now followed by sharks. Oh, and remember Captain Clado? The one that got sent back? He was supposed to send reinforcements to help the battered Pacific Squad. However, Clado would use this opportunity to take revenge on Mad Dog and assemble a collection of the absolute worst nutshells and remnants of nautical antiquity that he could find, and send them as quote-unquote reinforcements. It was lovingly dubbed the Sink by Themselves Squad. How lovely. They were supposed to meet up in South Africa, however, knowing the quality of these ships, Admiral Mad Dog straight up avoided meeting with them altogether. The Indian Ocean chapter thing. At Madagascar, things took another turn for the worse. Mad Dog fell severely ill and remained confined in his cabin for a couple of weeks, which would have been a manageable temporary loss if it wasn't for his second-in-command suffering a brain hemorrhage at the same time, leaving him paralyzed and the crews unsupervised. Let's see, who's next? Ah, well, congratulations, you're in charge now. Well, I guess everybody for themselves. To no one's surprise then, rather than making progress at sea, they would spend more and more time ashore in saloons, brothels and casinos. The crews quite literally made their own command with blackjack and hookers. This went as well as you would imagine, and on board you would now not only find an unsupervised crew, piles of coal, African fauna, but now also a range of STDs and malaria. But luckily, it only got better from here. Yeah, right. The Kamchatka held a funeral for one of their deceased and fired a salute shot. A fairly standard procedure. However, this time they accidentally used a live shell and hit one of the other ships, for once showing remarkable accuracy. Seeing the crewman frequently under the influence was a given at that point, but more and more officers would also stop giving a damn. One officer bought around 2,000 cigarettes for himself in Madagascar. Smoking 3 packs a day was of course not a big health concern until they found out that the cigarettes were filled with opium, and then most of the crew mutated. Wait, no, they mutilated. No, they had a mutiny, which was quickly put down. However, the worst case of these slackers and mutineers, along with some revolutionaries, got sent home with a couple of ships. Revolutionaries, huh? Wonder what ever happened to those. When the recovered Mad Dog wanted to restore some semblance of order to his traveling circus, he ordered gunnery practice. Over the course of the day, they fired hundreds of shells and torpedoes on stationary targets. And needless to say, I guess at this point, not a single hit was recorded that day. Mad Dog was equally surprised as a chef signing up for kitchen nightmares when the kitchen is inevitably called a nightmare. The ships had so many altercations and terrible aim that they had to be resupplied with ammunition before they went to battle the Japanese. Yeah, that's right, there was a point to this journey. When they opened the containers, instead of ammunition, they found 12,000 pairs of fur-lined boots and winter coats. Imagine the look on your face when you've just spent the last couple of months in the scorching hot African summer for the first time in your life. Remember, these guys are from Russia. And then someone sends you fur-lined boots. Beautiful. However, they eventually received their ammunition and went on to their date with destiny. After everything that the heroic 2nd Pacific Squad went through, a group of frightened Russian peasants almost starting a war with England, mastering the logistics of the longest military mission ever, journeying around the whole world, exploring new lands, capturing fantastical animals, fighting off sharks, hunger and disease. They had finally arrived to vindicate their fallen brethren. And in what has to be described as the weirdest, craziest, Phoenix from the Ashes story, they obviously lost. Thank you very much for watching. This was my first YouTube video, but I plan to make a lot of these. And as a thank you for everyone that supported me from the very start, I'm gonna put the name of my first 100 Patreons into the credits of every video I'll ever make on this channel. So the first Patreon will always appear first, the second one second, and so on and so forth. If you don't feel like subscribing just yet, you know what, that's absolutely fine. Just the next time you're with a group of friends and you don't know what to do or what to talk about, or I don't know, maybe it's a funeral or whatever, just show them this video. And if you think making a Patreon before your first YouTube video is more inappropriate than playing the penis game at a gender reassignment surgery, then I guess you're right. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Have a lovely day.